Okay, yeah, I started recording. Yeah. So welcome everybody. Sorry for the delay. We were having some issues to sign in. First of all, thank you. I know it's Saturday afternoon and after lunch almost, so I appreciate you taking time. And hope that this session will kind of give something back in terms of learning new things. So to kind of we have been exposed to building APIs and using microservices on different levels. And obviously, security is a topic which is very many times very obscure, right? So people feel that okay, this is a thing which either is responsibility of somebody else, or I just need to focus on building code, and often that can lead to issues in the production, right? So we are kind of trying to understand today how this whole security, what are the basic elements of it, and some of you might be familiar with some bits of it or already using it. Building secure API is the topic. I'm Mahesh. I'm working with AWS as a solution architect. I work with large enterprises, and today we are focusing on API. The areas I focus are primarily networking and security. Okay, so let's get started. And I think please feel free to post any questions in the chat, as well as if you want to have, we will have interactive discussions as and when you have questions. So please keep the questions coming. Okay. Uh, okay. So let's look at the topics that I'm going to cover. I'm going to talk to you about some security patterns, what APIs are commonly used, what are the different ways by which we can protect the APIs, and then I'm going to look at each of the scenarios, right? How do you use federation, and how do you use OpenID Connect and client certificate, so forth. So this is basically the structure of the talk today. Okay. Yeah. So let's get started with
Yeah,
the patterns, right? So fundamentally, why we should provide an API? I mean, just to kind of give you an idea, we have builders, we are developers, we build apps. What does API provide differently, right? So API essentially, if you look at it, right, we give some kind of abstraction. Let's say you are developing a cool ML-based algorithm, and you have essentially done a lot of effort and hard work to develop it, and now you want to other people to consume it. So API is a mechanism by which we can reuse our work and let other people consume our work, and that's how you can kind of help the overall ecosystem. So you can also use API for generating new revenue. So essentially, a layer of abstraction if you can get started on it, right? Now, who are the consumers of the API? So I built an API. I have obviously my own applications. I can develop applications that can consume these APIs. Maybe it's as I said, an ML algorithm, or is it a mapping service, or is it like a service which takes voice and gives you a text transcription? So it is my own application. In addition, I can also monetize and make this available to other third-party service providers who can consume these APIs in their own services, right? And that's the service-to-service communication flow. And we are going to spend some time on how exactly this kind of a service-to-service flow happens, and what are the underlying complexity about it, right? So the first is the user and the service flow, and the second is the service-to-service flow. Now you may think about APIs. Okay, what are the alternatives, right? Okay, if I develop an API, do I always need an API gateway? So API gateway is a construct which is obviously one of the options, but you can always maybe create a load balancer and have your users access the APIs through a load balancer, right? That's very much a common pattern. Now, when do I really need to use a load balancer, and when do I need to use an API, right? So that's a discussion we will have. Fundamentally, we see API is giving other opportunities, right? So APIs gateways can also allow you to transform the request as well as the response. So let's say your request is coming in a REST format, and your response is or your downstream application, your backend application here is accepting some other format, maybe SOAP or another form of REST API. So you have opportunity to kind of transform this API from one format to other format, as well as the response, right? So this is a big advantage because you have you can kind of connect to multiple backends and not necessarily act as a proxy. API gateway adds a value. Load balancer just distributes a request. It really doesn't transform the request in any form. You know, what are the other capabilities, right? Security. So this is a big effort. If you are doing your own security, right, it's like you will have to kind of spin up your own infrastructure. API gateway or platforms have this ability inbuilt, so you can just plug in this security inside your API gateway, and you just focus on developing your services. So authentication authorization is a big plus if you go for API gateway. In addition, there are some operational things that you can do. Caching, you can kind of throttle the request, monitor, meter the request. So these are other capabilities that API gateway provides. Okay, so that's about API gateway as a tool. Now zooming in, yeah, so this is one more common pattern, right? Look at a SaaS provider, right? So let's say I have a service example.com and I have multiple customer, let's say customer one, customer two, and I can, you are often probably seen webex.com, right? So you have customer one has its own webex.com portal, customer two has its own webex.com. So API gateway can potentially give you a single entry point for your all your service provided to multiple customers, and can front end multiple backend services, right? So you have service one, service two, and maybe documents in an S3 bucket or Lambda service. So API gateway can essentially orchestrate or distribute requests to different backend services, keeping a simple single domain kind of a whitelisting, right? So you have that pattern very common in a SaaS provider where you have multiple customers, and you can still whitelist your domain and make it available to different customers. Now, how do I secure the API, right? So this was about importance of API, why you use API gateway. Now, the next question is, how do I secure this API? And the topic for today is, okay, as an app developer, if I want my users to access the API, what are the options in front of me? So first option is you can develop your own identity service, right? So you can write a sign in page, and users can sign in, and then they can leverage your all the whole capability which you develop by yourself. Obviously, it's an overhead for the users because they have to remember another username, password, and also it's a lot of effort for you to store all the user information in an encrypted format and secure that data. So what happens is many people or most of the companies nowadays use federation. What is federation? They depend upon other identity providers, and it could be social identity providers like Google, Facebook, Amazon, or their own enterprise identity, or maybe Active Directory based federation. So you don't solve the identity problem yourself. You federate it with an existing identity provider where user has already done his sign in, and then you leverage that and provide access to the application or the API using federation. And there are multiple other options that I'm going to look at for securing the APIs. Okay. Okay. So what are the whole scenario, right? So if you look at Amazon API Gateway, like there are multiple options I mentioned. The first one we talked about identity federation, right? So this is the first topic we are going to deal. And the fundamental thing here is that, okay, I have my API Gateway, I have my services, and this is an external identity provider, and it could be a social identity provider or an enterprise identity provider. The moment user comes up with some credentials, maybe with multi-factor authentication, and he approaches the API gateway, you simply forward that authentication request to this identity provider, and then once you get authenticated, they will send you some form of token, and then you proceed further. So this is one form of API security I can give. The other form of API security that you can use is with the TLS certificate, and we are going to deep dive into what is TLS certificate, how does it work. It is a very common scenario in IoT devices, for example, right? So you have IoT devices like a refrigerator or a washing machine, and you want to send some data to cloud, and there is a limitation that, of course, there is nobody to sign in, right? It's a device. So how do I secure this device and make sure that the data which flows from the device is not accessed by any other service or a user? So in such cases, client certificate is the option that you can leverage. The other option we always see in the service to service communication is through some API keys. So these are fundamentally the three different mechanisms of protecting the APIs, and we are going to dive into each of them one by one. Okay, so I see some questions in the chat. I just will take a pause here. Yeah. So okay. So Rahul, yeah, Revati has asked the question: is it going to be a hands-on session? So this is not a hands-on session. This is primarily a session, but I'm going to give you some probably pointers later that you can go and practice by yourself. So definitely, along with that video, what Tushal mentioned, we will also I will send you some links which you can do some workshops or exercises later. Okay.
Mahesh, your camera is just little
Yeah, yeah.
off.
Okay, okay. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Thanks.
It's better now.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So let's get further federated identities, right? So I'm going to start on federated identities, and just to kind of get how many of us have heard or used OAuth or OpenID Connect before? So uh, uh, you can kind of share what is your experience doing that. Has anybody been using OpenID Connect OAuth already? Okay, so it's
no,
yeah. So there is a kind of a mix. So definitely this is a topic which is having a lot of information if you search for it, right? And probably sometimes it is very
yeah,
confusing as a topic. Like, let's deep dive into it. What is OAuth? So OAuth is a standard, right? So it's a standard for securing a delegated access, as they call it, right? So let's say you have, as I said, some kind of an
yeah,
identity provider, and this identity provider is able to kind of provide a mechanism for applications to authorize access. Okay, applications, devices, APIs, and in a secured manner. So what is that meaning, right? So now this let's go further into it. So let's look at a case where there is some kind of a protected resource. Now this could be your username, your email address. Uh, are you able to hear me, Toshal? Okay.
yeah, yeah. It is absolutely fine.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay. Yeah, I just wanted to confirm.
yeah,
Okay. So
yeah,
uh, there is a protected resource here, which can be username, your profile information, your profile picture, and this protected information is something that is with the resource server. Now the client wants to access this. This is your new mobile app that you are developing, right? And you don't want, as I mentioned, to develop your own identity system. And how do I allow this client access to the protected data? Okay, so this is my app, maybe it's an example.com, and this is my protected data. And who is owning the data? The data is owned by what we call it as resource owner. You as a user, let's say you created a Gmail account, so you are the owner of that data, right? So you have the rights over the profile picture that you have set inside your email server. Now we are going to find out how this resource owner allows this client, which is your application, to access the resource which is protected, right? That's the whole problem that we are going to solve here. Okay, and the way to solve this problem, and I'm sure you must have seen this kind of a flow multiple times when you are, using any of the commercial applications or websites, right? So this is basically called as OAuth 2 flow, and there are multiple flows. So today I'm going to talk about the authorization code flow. Okay, and this authorization code flow is one of the flow which is popular in the server side web application. So I will briefly mention the other flows also, but let's look at this flow first. What happens? So you have a resource owner. Let's say this is a actual user, maybe a user ABC, and he is trying to access a website called example.com. Now, example.com wants to access user ABC's profile picture, his profile first name, last name, and allow user ABC to access this application, right? Maybe this is an e-commerce application, and you want to access any products and order products and do shopping. Now, user ABC doesn't want to sign in and create a new password here. He says, I already have done my password management. I don't want to do it. So how do I solve this problem? If this user, this application example.com goes and finds out, okay, tries to access the profile information, they will not allow because we can't just give it a personal information. The flow is the resource owner says, okay, I want to sign in. So you user specifically say, I want to sign in with, let's say, a social identity provider, Google. So he clicks on sign in link here. Moment you click on the link, what happens in the background? Right? So there is a request that goes to the authorization server. So there is a URL request that goes here, and this request has certain parameters, and these are the very important parameters. So it identifies the client, so your application which is registered prior to that with Google, the scope, what is the information you want. You want the profile information, you want the contacts, and this scope can be something that is, it can be as much as I want this application to allow to post to my Facebook wall, for example, right? So you can define the scope information as per your you as per your application's need. And what happens once user signs in, if he signs in the application, you will be getting a consent page, and this consent page is where you will you must have seen, right? So do you allow example to access your profile contact? So this is a consent page that is shown to the user, explicitly showing, okay, what is this application really going to access. And if the resource owner says yes over here, then there is a parameter here which called redirect URI. It's a callback URI. So once it gets the consent, this callback URI is called, and you will get a thing called as authorization code as a parameter here. Now this callback URI is a URI or a URL which is there on the server side. Okay. So what is there on the server side is a page which you have defined in your application, which receives this particular code, right? And this particular page or the code is going to access the authorization server and exchange the auth code with the access token. So you send a code and you get back the access token. Now, along with this exchange, you also have to pass in something called as client ID and client secret. So these are some of the pre-registered information with the authorization server that the application has. Okay, and you send all this information and you get what is called as access token. Now, once you get hold of the access token, you can then call the resource servers APIs using the access token as a bearer token in the HTTP request. So then you will get, then maybe the contacts or profile information, they go and verify with the authorization server if the access token is valid and it is correct. If it is correct, you get the data and you have the user information. Now, this flow has two parts. If you look at it, one is in the blue lines. This is front channel, which means that it goes to your browser, and then there is something called as back channel, which is red in color. Now, the makers of the OAuth 2 have designed this such a way that let's say the URI code or the auth code, right, which goes to your front channel like browser. So even if somebody gets access to the auth code, they can't do anything. I mean, let's say somebody hacks your browser or the history of the browser and gets auth code, because they don't have access to the client ID, client secret, they can't really access your data because you don't have the access token. You can't do anything, right? So this is a kind of beauty of this, that okay, you are able to protect this with it's a little bit of a dance, right? You first get the code and then you exchange the code with the token, and then you use the token to access the protected resource, right? There is a little bit of kind of one more hop happening here, but that is for a purpose. So this is the authorization code flow. So I will take a pause, and I just want to know if there are any questions about authorization code flow. Yeah. So I'm just going to unmute everybody for a minute.
Not about authorization.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay. There is some
Yeah.
other question.
So
Yeah.
yeah, there is one question for the API gateway. Can
Okay.
multi-tenancy achieved with API gateway
Sure.
from AG?
Yeah. So definitely, AG, no, multi-tenancy is what we can achieve. If you look at the example which I had shown, I'll just go back and come forward. 1 minute. Yeah. So if you look at this example, right? 1 minute.
Mhm.
I'm just kind of getting a lag. Yeah. Okay. So
Yeah,
yeah. So if you look at this example, we have
this one.
yeah. So if you have multiple customers here, customer one and customer two, so we are able to kind of send data or request from both the customers through API gateway. Okay. And what happens, right? So how do I differentiate? Let's say service one wants to know whether the request is coming from customer one or customer two. So you have ability to add additional information in the header, which can denote, let's say, customer ID or account ID. So you have ability to add or insert this information inside the API gateway, so that your service can then do a differentiated experience based on the customer request. This is apart from any other URL parameters or any other form parameters that you have. you can control this, and that's why SaaS providers really can leverage API Gateway and have a single DNS but give a kind of a differentiated experience to different customer. Okay. So I see there is one
Yeah.
question from Kamal.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, AG.
Kamal, yes.
Yeah, the entire cycle is done through OAuth 2 protocol, or is there any other way? Okay, so let me go, Kamal, to the OAuth 2 flow. Yeah, so so as per OAuth 2, the exchange is something that is done through OAuth 2. Now, is there any other way? Okay, so if you have heard with Active Directory Federation Service, ADFS. So ADFS is using something called as SAML as a protocol. So SAML is a SOAP-based protocol. It is very similar to the flow which I have shown, but it is using XML and SOAP-based messages. So that's an alternative, I would say. But in terms of the adoption, OAuth 2 and OpenID is something that I see getting more and more popular. And SAML is still there in enterprise world where for the internal application. Okay. Does it answer your question, Kamal? Okay, great. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I think so. Yeah.
sure. So keep sending questions. I think that is very important because I think this is little has a little bit of abstractions, but let's I'll keep moving. If there are any questions, please feel free to ask them. Okay. So I
Yes,
mentioned,
I'll pick them one by one. Yeah, if
yeah.
whenever
th-
you have.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Tushar. Yeah. So I mentioned about the
Yeah.
server-side flow, which we saw, right? What are the other scenarios you have seen? Maybe I have a JavaScript-based application. I don't have a server-side flow. Can I use OAuth? Or I am doing a mobile app. Can I use OAuth? Or as I mentioned, there is a machine, or I mentioned about IoT devices. Can I use OAuth? So the answer is yes. There are multiple flows which are there. So I showed you one flow which is server-side flow. There is also something called as implicit grant flow, which is very popular for client-side web application. However, that is also getting kind of slowly deprecated, and there is a variation of that which is coming, which is called as OAuth code flow with PKCE. Okay, this is more common now with single-page applications or native applications. And the difference between that and the previous one is the earlier what used to happen is JavaScript. You can't really. I mean, the challenge with the JavaScript flow was that can I give my access token directly to JavaScript, right? And that was a risk always which was there, and your browser is not secured. So now implicit grant flow used to have that kind of a challenge, and now with PKCE, there is a kind of a one more level of code challenge which is presented. It's kind of a verification process which allows you to extend the OAuth flow. Similarly, client credential flow is used for machine to machine, like an IoT device, where there is a, because it's a device, you can probably embed the client ID and the client secret on the device itself. So you can kind of send a request there. So multiple OAuth flow, but today, as I said, I focused on the most popular flow, which is server-side web applications, and I'm going to do a demonstration of this as well shortly. Okay. So far so good. So similar to yeah, I mean, there is a question, what is PKCE? So PKCE is basically a mechanism by which what happens is we have a flow, and in the flow there is a kind of a secret, I'll say a code signer which is generated, right? So what happens here is there is some kind of a code signer, a random code which is generated, and then that code is encrypted and sent back to the server, and the same code is sent back again when you are doing the token exchange. So this is kind of a code verifier, code signing, which is an extension to OAuth 2 code flow. And yeah, if you read about it, you can see it is very common in the single page applications and the mobile applications. Okay. Deepa has asked a question, who generates the authorization code? Yes, very good question. The authorization server, right, which is in this case accounts.google.com, is responsible to generate the auth code. Okay, so that particular server is going to verify your user ID password, and it is also going to get your consent. Do you want to access? Once it gets both the information, it is going to send you the auth code on the URI, callback URI that you sent. Okay, and with that auth code you can then exchange the
Yeah.
uh, other information like a token. Okay, Ronit has asked,
Yeah.
yeah, thanks.
One. Yeah.
uh, yeah, so
Go ahead.
Yeah, so do PayPal and other payment gateway also use the same? So underlying, right? So again, these two protocols, which is OAuth 2 and OpenID Connect, they are basically for identity verification, right? So if once your identity is verified, right? So what happens is, let's say there is I say PayPal as a client app, okay? So PayPal is a client app, and this
Mhm.
client app is basically going to request, you are going to talk to the client app with some initial identity, and this identity can be any of the identity providers. Once the identity is established, right? So once the client has a token, then for making any other request, the client app is going to reuse the token. So what happens is, I said that okay, I get the auth token, and this auth token is going to be reused again and again for making any future requests. Okay. There is another question from Deepa. Do you explicitly build callback URI? Yes, so callback URI is a URI which is in your application, because this URI is where it's like after doing all the dance of identity authorization, finally you are going to get a token. So you have to write a callback URI, and in that callback URI you have to write the code which exchanges the auth code with the access token. Okay, that is the whole purpose. Now there is another aspect to it, which is some managed identity providers. Like we have many services, including Amazon Cognito, who actually do a lot of abstraction. So I will come to the managed services part of it, but I just wanted you to understand the basics before we go into the managed part of it. Okay, so definitely that's the thing. I'm just going to take a couple of more questions before going. How is HashiCorp Vault different from OAuth, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so what is HashiCorp Vault? Vault is basically a mechanism for you to kind of store secrets, right, and manage the secrets. So here we are talking about a broader scope, right? So we are talking about a, a protocol or a mechanism for multiple identity providers and multiple applications to talk to each other. So Vault is a very specific use case for it's meant for storing secrets and managing the secrets. So slightly different use cases for Vault and OAuth 2. Okay. Yeah. So Nilesh has a question. Communication between example.com and accounts.google.com back channel, right? So talks over the internet. So what are the security features to protect that? Okay. So the communication is going to go over internet. Yes. So what happens is, you will have information which is, let's say for example, this information, right? So you are going to send client ID, secret ID between this back channel, right? And this is the red channel. His question is, if this is red channel and I'm going to send some sensitive information, how do I protect it? So yeah, so this is from let me I think Nilesh, right? Nilesh, yeah. So Nilesh, just hold on your question. I'm going to answer this
Yeah.
question when I'm going to go over TLS. So I'm going to deep dive into what is TLS encryption, and then you will get the answer. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, so let's keep moving, and let's go into the OpenID Connect flow. So what is OpenID Connect? I'm sure you must have heard Java Web JSON Web Token, right? Very commonly heard term. Now OAuth 2 we already learned. Already it has multiple things, and perhaps it takes a while to digest what is OAuth 2. Now we have one more thing called as OpenID Connect. What is it? Now OAuth 2 is a broad specification about authorization, that it has a lot many things, but it still has a kind of implementation specific view, right? So you will still have maybe Google, Facebook, everybody has different ways to implement it, and that's left a developer who wants to integrate with many identity providers. You want to give users the flexibility to sign with Google or Facebook or Amazon or any other identity provider. I don't want to limit myself, right? I want my application to be used by as many users as possible. So how do I solve this problem? So then OpenID Connect was developed as a specification on top of OAuth 2. It doesn't replace or changes OAuth 2 fundamentally. It standardizes certain token formats and scopes. Now what are these? So what is scope? We already seen profile, email address, phone. These are different parts of scope. OpenID introduces one more scope called as OpenID. So the scope itself is called as OpenID. That's a required scope if you are talking about OpenID Connect. So any server, OAuth server which supports OpenID Connect, when it receives the OpenID scope, it is going to behave differently. It is going to respond differently. Now, what are the claims? Now, this is again the information that the identity provider will provide, and these claims are key value pairs, right? So they will give information again in a standard format. So your application doesn't depend on identity provider. Okay, I'm using OpenID Connect. These are the standard information that I'm going to receive. I can extract this information and consume in the application. Uh, Now, the other thing is response type. Now, this is exactly same as what we got from OAuth 2. The response types is another same parameter that is carried forward. As I said, OpenID Connect builds on OAuth 2. Then the whole thing is wrapped around in terms of tokens, and you'll keep on hearing multiple token types. So it also standardizes the token format. Okay, let's look at what OpenID tokens look like and OpenID Connect flow looks like fundamentally. Now you are all familiar with the OAuth 2 flow. So what happens is again the client. Now this client is actually this client is actually some kind of a server-side application, you can imagine, right? And there is a actual end user who is trying to sign in. So here you are going to actually limit, or you can put the scope as OpenID Connect, and you can say, okay, I want, apart from code, if you remember the code was a response, I also want ID token. So I asked for ID token. Now this is OpenID Connect compatible authorization server, and this is going to validate the user, maybe put the credentials, verify okay, do you want to grant access, okay. If everything is fine, the user is going to be directed to a callback URI, and this callback URI is where you are going to get, earlier you were getting code, now I'm going to get the ID token also. Okay, so this ID token is something which is containing a lot of rich information that I can consume. Now, knowing the challenges, because it's ID information, it's very sensitive information. How do I know it is not been modified by somebody in the middle? So what OpenID Connect gives is two options. You have option to verify this token back with the authorization server and verify its integrity. If the token is valid, then you can consume it. Or you have an option to kind of call another endpoint called as user info endpoint, and then verify whether it will return you all the information. So in addition, all the OAuth to flow, right? Let's say you want to post on the Facebook wall, or you want to access the contacts, all those API access apart from identity remains the same. That is same with OAuth 2. Okay, so OpenID Connect just simply adds some standardization, gives you ID token, gives you fundamentally the JSON web token that you can consume and verify. Now the flow is clear. I'm just going to break this ID token and give you the view of what it is there inside the token. Okay, what is inside the token? Essentially, first thing is it has three parts, and they are all base64 URL encoded. So this is what it will look like. If you try to look at the ID token, it is going to look like this. Okay, and it's not having these colors. It's just that to differentiate the three parts separated by a period. Okay, so base64 encoded three parts. If you decode each of these three parts, you are going to get certain information. What is that information, right? So first part, if you decode, you are going to get what's the algorithm and what's the there are multiple fields, potential fields, but couple of fields I have showed what is the algorithm and what is the key ID. Okay, the second part, which is the blue part you see here, if you decode it, you will get a JSON kind of information about the identity, which has basically first name, last name, family name, date of birth, etc., etc. So this is the second part. And the third part is signature. Now, if you decode the signature, you are also going to get a binary. So it's a binary content. You can't interpret it directly. Now I mentioned about you need to validate the ID token before consuming this token, right? And that's the reason, because somebody has modified some information, you are going to have problems. So how do I validate this information? So one option is you can send this information back to the ID endpoint, and you can call the verify process. Other information is you can verify yourself, provided you have the key. Okay, you need a public key for the way it was encoded. Okay, so now this is the digital verification process. What happens is you have this payload, which is a JSON text. Okay, you do hashing using this algorithm. This is SHA-256. You do digital verification by doing hashing. you will get hashed payload content, right? So you have some kind of a hashed payload content. Okay. Then you have some binary. I said the third part is a signature, which is binary. So you have to decrypt the signature using a public key. Okay. Once you decrypt the signature, it is going to also result in some kind of hash payload. Okay. Now you compare the hash payload that you got from the payload side and the hash payload that you got decrypting the signature. If both of these two match, which means that the content of the payload has not been tampered and it matches with the signature which was sent along with the ID token. Remember, this is a asymmetric encryption because this key, a private key was used to encrypt the data. So nobody can modify that, and only if you have the private key, you can generate a new signature, right? So with this kind of a flow, you have a 100% assurance saying that, okay, my digital signature is matching to my payload. So this payload is accurate from what it was sent. Okay. So this is all about the ID token flow and what two. Okay. So keep as before, please keep sending your questions and we'll take to the next step. Okay. Now, next topic I'm going to cover is how do I secure. Now this is all about OAuth to OpenID Connect. Now how do I put these pieces into practice, right? And especially this is AWS user forum. How do I connect with Amazon API Gateway and Cognito? So Cognito, what is Cognito? Now, Cognito is a managed service which kind of abstracts some of the concepts that we talked about, right? It has integrations with federated identity providers like social identity as well as the enterprise identity, and plus it has its own internal user directory and so forth, right? So we are going to look at Cognito briefly and see how can I integrate my API gateway to use Cognito and protect my APIs. Okay, so this is what we, if you remember the picture which we saw in the beginning, we had API gateway, we have a bunch of, we had API gateway, we had a bunch of microservices of services. Now I'm going to put, and then we talked about identity federation as one mechanism. So this is all fine on paper. Now we are going to see on how Amazon API gateway and Amazon Cognito can really solve this problem of kind of having federated access. So let's look at a demo. Okay. Yeah, so before that, what's the whole point of demo? That users are going to sign in into a user pool or what is there in the Cognito, and they are going to get some kind of token, and with this token I'm going to access the API gateway. Every time I want to hit the API, I'm going to access API gateway, and API gateway internally will authenticate you with Cognito, and then it will basically allow you to access the protected resource. Okay. So this is the demo flow. I'm going to switch over to the AWS console. Okay, and let us look at the demo. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So let me get the browser over here.
Screen.
Can you see my screen? Or is it coming?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but
Okay.
it is showing half of the screen. Yeah. Now it is full, Mesh.
Okay. Okay. Great. Yeah. So this is the API gateway login, and I have created multiple resources inside API gateway, right? So there are 3 resources, and I'm going to, I just created 3 resources for demonstration purpose. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to, I also have Amazon Cognito setup. Okay. So let me open Cognito. Okay. So this is a user pool that I created. And this is for a federated identity, and there is something called as app client, right? So app client is basically this particular application example.com that I am developing. I registered this application with Cognito. Okay, and this is basically having a client ID and a client secret, and then there are certain settings that are used by Cognito, okay, for for using the OAuth 2 flow, and then this is the different OAuth 2 scopes that I'm allowing. So I'm allowing OpenID Connect. I'm saying this is my callback URL. Okay, so this is what I have set up in Cognito. So the first thing I'm going to do, and I'm going to show you here, this is the Cognito sign-in page. And if you can see, there is a 1 minute. I think it is just zooming this. Okay. Okay. So I'm just going to copy this one and just paste it in a text editor so that you can see. Just give me a second. Okay. So let me just open up page. Okay. There's some issue with the editor. Yeah. Yeah.
Editor, yeah.
Yeah. So just give me 1 second. Okay. So I'm just going to show you the URL which I just talked about. Okay. Okay. So if you look at it, right? So I'm having multiple things over here, and what it is containing my information about the request. So I'm having my response type equal to code. Okay. I'm having this is my client ID. So this is my client ID, and then I have let me just wrap this.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So I'm having client ID.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is my client ID. This is my response type. It's code. This is my scope: email, OpenID Connect, profile, and admin. And this is my redirect URI. Okay. So when I make a request in my browser with
Yeah.
this kind of a flow, let me just make a request. Okay, it is going to go to my sign in page of Cognito. Okay, so I'm going to log in with Cognito. I'm not logging with Google or any other thing. I'm logging with Cognito just to keep it simple, but you can have sign in with social identity or any other identity provider. I'm just using the Cognito identity provider. So once I sign in here, I'm going to get to a callback page. Now this is a fake page, but in reality, you will go to an application page. And why I'm showing you, like, just because normally, no, if you develop an end-to-end application, you will immediately process this code and you will start the downstream flow. But I wanted to specifically call out the flow and not so much of the application behavior. What happens is your application, now your backend application has received this code, and there was a question by someone earlier about how is this code, right? This is the code which is you see in the screen. Now this code is going to be consumed by your application, and you are going to actually exchange this code for access token and so forth. Now how do I do it uh, with the Cognito user? So now I'm going to switch to another tool which is Postman. Okay, so I have set up Postman.
Yeah.
Okay, which is a tool where I'm going to use it to obtain a token. Okay, so this is the this is my Cognito flow, and this is going to happen on the backend, right? So what is going to happen again? This is a backend flow. Okay, and here if you look at it, there is a code. Okay, yeah. Okay, so this is the code, and I'm going to replace the code which I just got from the. Sorry, I copied the whole thing. Let me copy the. Yeah. So what was the code I got? Let me copy the code only. Yeah. Yeah, so this is the code I got. I'm just going to copy this code, and I'm going to get a token from this, right? So I am going to copy this here. Okay. Okay, so I have the recent code and I have, this is a request. Now you will say, what is this? So this is the backend flow, back channel. Somebody remember? So this is, I'm calling from the back channel. I'm calling token API. I'm passing code and I'm going to hopefully get back the token. Let's see what happens. Okay. Okay. So they have got an error. Let's see what's the problem. Okay. Is there something here extra? Okay. There was a new line, right? So it's
Yes.
so sensitive. I reboot the new line
Yeah.
and now I'm going to get. So what is the response, right? So I got back, these are the 3 tokens that I have got. So it has successfully exchanged my code with a token and it has sent me, because it's an OpenID scope, it has sent me ID token. And remember the format I said, it's a base64 encoded format. It has also sent me access token and a refresh token, essentially, right? And this is basically the whole flow from a OAuth 2 perspective. Okay. Now let's go back to API gateway because this talk is all about API gateway, right? So how does it work with API gateway? Now in my application, if you look at it, where is my browser? 1 minute. Okay. So over here, if you look at it, I have created multiple APIs. Now I'm going to open this API hello world. Okay. And in this API, what I have done is I have configured this API to essentially receive requests from, yeah, so this is the API gateway configuration. And inside the API gateway, I have given authorization is pointing to Cognito. Okay, so Cognito user full demo, which is nothing but the pool 2, is basically going to authorize the API request coming here, right? So this is an integration which between the two AWS services, Cognito and API gateway. I have other mechanisms to do authorization, which is AWS IAM, or I have something called Lambda authorization, etc., which we are going to see shortly. But here I'm going to first demonstrate with Cognito. So this is the demo user pool, okay, which is already set up. Now I'm going to go back to Postman and I'm going to copy this key here, which is my ID token. Okay. One. Okay. So this is up to W I have to copy. Okay. So I'm going to copy this whole key here and I'm going to send another request, which is request to my API gateway. Okay. Now API gateway, I have set up a header called as authorization. Okay. So this is the header which is going to contain my ID token. Okay, and I'm going to use this. This is the, yeah, I got it correctly. Let's see if my API gateway is going to accept this token. Okay, so I'm hitting the API and I'm sending a authorization. See what has happened. Okay, so it has responded with me the backend message which is coming from my Lambda function. Okay, so what if I manipulate this API and I just, instead of E, I will just put Y here. Okay, I'm just hitting this Y here. Purposefully I have kind of invalidated my authorization and I'm going to hit send. Maybe there is some caching that, okay, immediately it got unauthorized. Okay, so because I had a right token and I was able to get the correct response from my API gateway. Otherwise, if the token is invalid or token is missing, it is going to fail. So this will happen for every API request that you make. Your client has to kind of send this authorization information, and you need to uh, uh, access the API. So this is essentially about the ID flow which is there coming from OpenID Connect. Okay. Okay, so then we'll go on to, so we completed the security patterns, we talked about the federation. Now let's talk about certificates. So just to kind of get a view, right, how many of us are familiar with mutual TLS or TLS as a protocol? Have you had any chance to use HTTPS or TLS? I mean, all of us access the bank website, right? So we understand what is HTTPS. So
Yes.
today we are going to go a little bit deep into what is TLS and how can it be used for APIs. Okay, so obviously we talk about TLS, we have something called certificates, right? We upload a certificate on the server side, and then we have your browsers talking to the servers, etc. Okay, now let's go a step back further, right? What is happening? Let's say we have two users, and the user here is a physical user, and the Bob can be a server also, right? So just think about it. And these two users, like a browser talking to a server, happens over the internet, right? And the internet, there are multiple routers, and each of these routers have ability to access the data what you send it, right? So it is potentially untrusted network that is there in the middle, and you are sending some data, right? And that was a problem that SSL and TLS wanted to solve. How do I send secret data over untrusted network? Okay, and how can I do it in a bidirectional manner, back and forth? Okay, so the way it started is with the popular encryption keys algorithms, which is, first let's talk about the public private key. Okay, so let's say B is the server and A is the user or the browser based user, and the initially A says okay, A to B says okay, give me your public key. A public key is a key which can be sent over any network, because anyone gets access to the key, cannot decrypt and cannot kind of have any he can only encrypt data, he can't decrypt data. Okay, so what happens is you send a public key. So B generates a key pair, it's a private key, he gives it to himself and he sends the public key to A. What does A do? A has some secret information, and A encrypts that secret with the public key that he received from B. Now A sends the encrypted secret over the wire to B, and B can now safely decrypt it because it has the private key secured. So this way A can keep on sending secrets to B without having any fear that okay, somebody will access my sensitive data and get access to it, right? So A can keep on sending data to B. Okay, so this is where we can feel okay, we are crossed one hurdle. But there is a problem here. B can't send any data to A because B doesn't have, I mean, B sends some data, anybody can intercept and access this. So how do we solve this problem? We can do it in two ways. We can also use another asymmetric key, or we can use symmetric keys. I'm just going to show with the example of symmetric keys. So how does it work? The initial handshake is very similar. Uh, uh, I hope you can see. Yeah, I hope you can see the screen. Yeah, the initial handshake is very similar.
Yes, yes, yes.
Where yeah, so A is going to ask for a public key. B is going to this is a pink public key. Let's call it pink. Okay, so he creates a key pair and he sends the public key to A. So B has a private key and then A gets the public key. Now what happens is A generates a symmetric key. What is symmetric key? The same key can be used for encryption and decryption. Okay, so in that case he generates a new symmetric key and then he encrypts that symmetric key with the public key pink. So the black key is encrypted with another key, so we have a kind of an envelope encryption. Now A can send this encrypted key to B, and then B can decrypt it with the private key, so it gets the same key which A and B have. Now both of them can exchange secret data because they have the key which is safe and secure and nobody else has access. So that is how the exchange can happen. Now, do you see any problem in this flow? I mean, while the data is safe, somebody mentioned about a flow, and I kind of referred to that. Okay, we will answer that little late in the later in the section. So there is a problem in the flow. Okay, what if?
Nikhil was there.
Yeah. So who was that? I don't recall. Somebody had asked the question.
I think Nikhil was.
Nikhil or Nilesh.
Nikhil has.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
So
Nilesh. Yeah,
Nilesh,
Nilesh
yeah,
it is.
yeah, yeah. So Nilesh, this is the answer to your question, right? So yes, there is a possibility, and this applies to any kind of backend systems where there is secret being exchanged, which is called as the man in the middle attack, right? What is the man in the middle attack? So there is a hacker which
Mhm.
intercepts the request between the A and B, right? So this hacker gets access to that request, and instead of B replying, the hacker replies, okay, he asks for a public key, okay, I'll give you a public key. And he generates his own fake public key, and he has the private key of that fake public key. Now A sends some secret, he has the private key, he decrypts it, and the secret is hacked. So this is a man in the middle attack, right? Very kind of one of the attacks for stealing secrets. So how do you overcome it? So we have something called as certificates and certificate signing authorities, right? So what happens is there is a third party digital certificate signing authority, which basically is trusted by many browsers and many servers, right? So this certificate is what you ask for. So apart from, and this certificate can be attached to a domain name. Let's say you have example.com, amazon.com. Each of these domain name will have to register a certificate for that particular domain, right? And then you can also have wildcard certificate or specific certificates for each subdomain, etc., etc. So what does A do? A asks for, okay, give me public key, give me a certificate also. Now B gives the public key as before, but it also has to present a certificate which is in the X509 format. What does A do? A takes the certificate and goes to a certificate authority and checks, okay, is this certificate valid? Is B really B, or is it somebody else? And if he compares it, he will get the answer, yes, B is really valid. He will get, then only he will send the secret data. Okay, that's how the whole digital certificate process works. Now A is very sure that B is sending the data which is really belonging to B, and I'm completely secure. And this is how the way we work in the browsers, right? All our things, we already have signed certificate. If it is an untrusted certificate, it immediately pops up as an alert in our browsers also. Now
Yes.
this is one way communication again, right? So what we are talking about is how do we ensure that the B or server also knows that A is really A, or somebody who is hacked, or somebody who has compromised the machine, right? So how do I make sure that is not the case? So to do that, and that's the whole point of calling as mutual client certificate, right? So, or mutual TLS. So here, apart from B presenting the certificate like before, A also has a valid client certificate. So A also generates a certificate. So we have B in the earlier flow remains same. Give me public key, give me certificate, gives the public key along with the ping certificate. He checks the certificate is okay, and then A also has its own certificate. A sends the certificate, client certificate, along with the secret. B first checks if the A certificate is valid. So server is verifying the client certificate. If the certificate is valid, then only it trusts that, okay, the secret which is coming really from A and not by somebody else. So this kind of completes, I'm able to exchange the secret data, but I am also sure of the identity of the other party. I am trusted that, okay, this is really the party with whom I'm exchanging any secret information. So this is the whole background in which, I wanted to give emphasis, and it's very important for a service to service or a B2B communication. So we have this whole mutual TLS exchange. Now, how does it work with API Gateway? Now, a couple of months back, we supported this mutual TLS support. Now, if you have to implement by yourself, I mean, it's again a lot of effort, right? So now it is a part of platform, Amazon API Gateway. So you have a trust store that you can use, where you can keep all your certificates, and then clients, when they have valid certificate, and it is configured with API Gateway. API Gateway will validate those certificate, and if only if they are valid, then you are able to access mm, the certificate. Else, we are able to kind of take it forward. If there is a issue, it is going to be rejected. So this is a valid certificate, and this is an invalid certificate. So I'm just, I know we are out of time, but if everybody, I mean, if some of you can stay on, I can continue, and maybe others can also watch later as well, right? So Tushal, if it is okay, if I can extend for.
Yeah, we can continue. Yeah, we can continue, Mahesh. Yeah, no problem with that. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So these are the two scenarios where we have kind of a valid TLS certificate and an invalid TLS certificate, right? Both cases we have some kind of authentication. Now let us look at a demonstration of how this really works in practice. Okay, so let me show you a case. So we have seen a API gateway, and we are able to kind of just give me 1 second.
Yeah, fine.
Yeah, sorry. So this is a kind of a way which you can set up the mutual TLS certificate. Okay, so you have to create a custom domain for the API gateway. Okay, and in the API gateway you have ability now to set the certificate. So you create a custom domain. Okay, and in the custom domain you specify the trust store. Okay, so I enable this build TLS on, and I set a certificate key here, which is in an S3 bucket, and I map my API endpoints here. So I have mapped my API endpoint hello world here, and I'm going to use this configuration to kind of make sure my API is protected with this kind of a private trust store. Okay, and if I try to access the API, right, what happens is if I access the API here uh, without kind of any trust kind of a thing, I'm going to get an error which is I mean, I will not be able to access the error because it is connection reset, right? So at the SSL layer itself, I'm failing here, right? The SSL handshake itself will fail because the certificate was not presented.
Yeah.
And if I let's see, if I present a valid certificate, so I'm here. If you look at the command, right, it's a key and the certificate, both are presented. Okay, and I access my API. This is an HTTPS API, and I hit here. I am able to kind of get the response. So you can test this very easily. The way you do it is you'll have to create a yeah, I mean, there is a blog post also. We'll not go into details of how to set this whole thing up, but there is a blog post which talks about create these kind of keys and how to copy those keys into a trust store and then set it up, right? So there is a detailed blog post from Amazon on the same topic. But essentially what it's trying to say is that you enable the mutual TLS and store the key inside a trust store in S3, and then your APIs can be protected using the SSL protection, right? So this one you saw I'm accessing without the keys. It is the SSL connect itself is failing, but if I have a proper certificate, then I'm able to access the certificate with key. And the same thing you can test with Postman also. The Postman also has a ability to kind of and you might be wondering that okay, so far I didn't show you in the Postman how did it work. So Postman also has ability to specify certificates, and you can upload client-side certificates for testing and debugging. And you can distribute these certificates to your IoT devices and clients, and they can basically access your API without having any username, password, or something. So this certificate itself is your password, is what you can consider. Okay. So this was mutual TLS kind of a scenario we covered. Okay. Then we have the third pattern. So we have covered federation, we have covered client certificate. The third pattern is simpler, which is
Yeah.
basically, yeah, API keys. So what is API key? I mean, API keys can be any key which is protecting your API. In case of AWS, we have IAM authentication, right, for API gateway. So basically, this is the third leg of the whole thing. So what is here? Maybe there is a service which is wants to access the API, and I can simply use AWS IAM. So we already saw Cognito, we already saw TLS-based authentication. The third thing is with API keys, and I have what is called a signature for signing process. So I have access key and secret key, and I signed my HTTP request using access key, secret key, and I am able to kind of access the gateway, and my gateway will validate against this is the IAM validation. If that particular IAM user has API execute permission, you are able to access the API. Otherwise, it will fail. Of course, it means that you have to secure the API keys very in the inside the service, right? So you have to make sure that these credentials are protected because it is access key, secret key. They are not temporary credentials; they are permanent credentials. Of course, they can be rotated, etc., etc. Okay, so how does it work? I'm going to kind of quickly show you the working. Okay, so this is this is the third API, and this is the Hello 3 API. So if I go to this one, which with APIs, and let me open the Hello World. Okay, yeah, so it is coming up. Okay, I'm just opening the authorization here. So if you remember, we had set for Hello 2, we had set up the Cognito. Now I'm going to show you the how to set up IAM authorization. Okay, the page is still loading. So we have ability to set up the authorization at the individual resource level. Okay, so I opened the Hello 3 resource, and I'm just going to go ahead and set up the authorization here. And here it is showing as the IAM. So instead of using Cognito, I'm using IAM keys for accessing this particular API. Okay, so this is the setup or configuration I do inside my API gateway. And if I go to my Postman for posting requests, so essentially, if you look at it, here inside Postman, it's very nice, right? It has all the different ways of authentication. And if I go AWS signature, I can essentially post a signature here, and I can essentially access the data, right? So if I'm using this method, yeah, I'm getting the response from the server. And if let's say I use no auth here, and I send a request to this API, it is going to say this requires a authorization. So this is missing the authorization because I have protected with IAM authorization, right? So with this kind of multiple ways, we can kind of have this particular feature enabled and tested. Okay. So yeah, I mean, yeah, there is a question here. Yeah. So question is, how do I protect the APIs using
Yeah.
AWS WAF, right? Vineet has asked this question. So API Gateway actually has a inbuilt integration with
Yeah.
AWS WAF, right? So you have ability to configure your API Gateway so that any request coming from outside goes to WAF, and you can enable WAF rules, either your own rules or your custom rules, or you can have third-party rules, and you can protect your API. So API Gateway from Amazon can be, you can have layer 7 protection with WAF.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean,
Yes.
yeah, so that's the summary basically. So we saw in this session different challenges in terms of building secure APIs, and we saw federation as one of the key patterns. In addition, we saw how do we use mutual TLS as a mechanism, and then we finally saw API keys. So if there are any more questions, we can have it now. Uh, So I would also thank you for your time.
Yeah.
No, I know it's a Saturday, and I know it's like a deep topic. So I hope this was useful. And I'm just going to unmute all for a kind of a closing thing. I think you can unmute yourself now. Yeah. If there are any other feedback, we can take it.
Yeah.
And if there are
If you
suggestions,
have any questions, yeah,
yeah,
definitely we are open for suggestions. Yeah.
yeah, sure. Thank you. And if you have any suggestions on future
Thank you, Vinit.
topics,
Thank you, Vinit, for that.
yeah, I mean, we can talk about networking
Yeah.
security. I can take those topics if it's interesting, if somebody is interested in hands-on workshop. So please, send your feedback to Toshal. I mean, Toshal, you do have Twitter and other posts, right? So you can share feedback and on
Yes.
that as
Yes.
well. That would really encourage us, and
Yeah.
we can.
Yes. And if you have anything, you can comment on the meetup page as well. We can incorporate those feedbacks. Yeah. Yes. So if we do not have, can we have one session on protecting APIs against DDoS and other attack? Mahesh,
Yeah,
yeah.
sure. We
So we
can,
have a question from,
Vinith, right?
yeah, Rick.
Absolutely. So we can have, I mean,
Yes.
that's very important. So Vinit, please keep thinking, and I think your topics
Mhm.
suggestions are very helpful. So definitely DDoS can be one of the topic we can take.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for your time today. I think we will wind up, Mahesh. I think we
Sure.
don't have questions now. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Mahesh, for your time. That this was a very interesting topic, I would say, and it's touching up the major, I would say, the pillar of the well-architected framework, which is the security. So thank you very much for this.
Appreciate it, Tushar. Thank you.